Hi, welcome everyone. Feel free to, as everyone's kind of joining the Zoom, if you are able to drop in the chat where you're coming from, if you want to do your name, that would be great. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. We'll give people just a couple minutes to sign on and get situated, and we will get started. You are welcome to turn on your camera if you would like, or it's also fine to um, stay behind the scenes. But we are so glad that you are here. I'm excited for our conversation today on the youth mental health crisis. I am going to, as we're giving people a couple minutes to join, I'm going to just give a brief introduction and we'll introduce our speakers and get going. But we thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very important conversation. And as we enter this conversation, I want us to take a moment to center ourselves. Perhaps you are joining us over your lunch break. Maybe you've had a busy morning. And so together, I want us to pause, to take a deep breath, to notice our feet on the floor, and perhaps where you are, there's sunshine in the window. And I also want you to bring to mind a young person in your life that you love dearly. And I want you to give thanks for them and for who they are and what they bring to the world. Whether you're here as a faith leader, a parent, a community member, or someone passionate about supporting youth, all of us gathered here are united, I think, by a shared commitment to support the well-being of our young people. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Carolee Hall. I'm on staff with the North Carolina Council of Churches and work with our Partners in Health and Wholeness Initiative. I'm joined by my colleague, Meredith Rawls, and we're so glad that you are here to talk about the critical issue of youth mental health that has been growing in our communities and perhaps what a response could look like within faith communities. We have a couple of great speakers today that I'm really excited to introduce you to. But first, I want to do something. I haven't done this. We haven't done this on one of our recent webinars, but I want to do a quick poll of the audience. So we're going to try this out and see, but I'm hoping that it'll pop up on your screen. But I just want to gauge who we have gathered here and to also to get you thinking and reflecting on the current context that you are coming from. And if everyone's able to do that, that would be great. And then maybe we'll be able to share the results so people can see. Are y'all able? Is this popping up on your screen? Are y'all able to see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. As people are finishing this, we have our first speaker is Dr. Trevor Eppheimer, is a professor at Hood Theological Seminary, and he's going to share some key insights from the book, The Anxious Generation. And then after that, we have another speaker. Let's see. And then at the end of that, we'll have each of them will share a little bit, and then we'll have some time for some conversation and dialogue. So you're welcome to jot questions down or put them in the chat, but we hope that we can end with a time of conversation. I know that I think perhaps maybe everyone is done with the poll, but I just want to show real quick before we let our first speaker begin. All right, are y'all able to see the results? So it looks like that the majority of people said that this is an extremely critical um, conversation and crisis in your community. Significant amount of people know several, at least one, if not quite a few people in their life that are young people that are experiencing mental health challenges. And then we have definitely have some that have know of at least a young person that has died by suicide. So thank you for participating in that brief little poll. I just wanted you all to know um, that as we gather across the state, we have a shared commitment and concern for our young people, and that is why we are here today. So I am going to let our first speaker take it over.
Oh, well, hello everyone. Good day. Greetings from Hood Theological Seminary. That seminary is located in Salisbury, North Carolina, off exit 75 off I-85. And Hood Seminary has been around since 1885. And our mission is to provide quality theological education that's affordable and accessible. We're one of 6 historically Black theological schools sponsored or accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. And I'm just delighted to be here, and I bring greetings from the Hood Theological Seminary family. So welcome, and thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join an important, what I think is an important conversation. Um, I think that this book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness, is probably one of the most important books I've read in the past year. And at Hood Theological Seminary, I facilitate what we call the Messenger Williams Community Education Initiative. So twice a year, we offer free courses to the community on topics dealing with faith and ethics and meaning in life. And this was our selection this past fall. So we did a community study that went 6 weeks with this particular book. And, this is outside my discipline, my immediate area of expertise. I'm a trained systematic theologian, and this book is written by a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. Maybe you've heard of him. He is Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at the New York University Stern School of Business. He is I guess, the envy of a lot of academics working today because he writes books that the general public actually wants to read, unlike many of the rest of us who, we're in disciplines, and the nature of those disciplines and the culture of higher ed pushes us to be so highly specialized that we spend a lot of time on these uh, what appear to the general public to be really trivial and insignificant issues, but that's how you get published, and that's how you get promoted, and that's how you get tenure. But Jonathan Haidt is kind of a throwback. We used to have people teaching in colleges and universities that were known as public intellectuals, and they addressed issues of concern that relate to the common good and society. So he is one of those folks. And his book, this book that we're talking about this afternoon, The Anxious Generation, it struck a chord with lots of people. And one of the reasons why is because it is focusing on a particular generation. And anytime you're dealing with an entire generation, you're dealing with people who are in your family, either your children or your grandchildren or your uh, nieces and nephews, people in your extended family. So I guess just about everyone knows a member of Gen Z. So that's what they're referred to in culture these days anyway. Who are Gen Z? They're persons born between 1995 and 2010. Um, they are today between the ages of 15 and 30. So if you know someone between the ages of 15 and 30, that's a member of Gen Z, and that's who Jonathan Haidt is focusing on in his particular book. Um, Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist. So it's important for us to recall what social psychologists do. A social psychologist is one who looks at uh, human mental states and asks themselves, um, how are those mental states caused or impacted by what's going on in the broader society? So they're trying to draw connections between what's going on within human beings and their internal lives and connect it to what's going on possibly out in the larger culture or the larger society. So, as a social psychologist, he is like most psychologists today are working heavily with data and keeping their eye on results of the latest studies. So, he started coming across his radar screen. He started to see some concerning study results, and the 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 book is just filled with data and graphs and charts. And there's a separate website where he lists, all the studies he's referring to. And so, readers can access that in great detail. But I'll just give you a few highlights here. He says studies have shown that there was a 139% increase in reported high levels of anxiety among persons between the ages of 18 and 25. A 139% increase that took place between the years 2008 and 2020. There was a reported 145% increase in depression among teenage girls and a 161 increase among teenage boys since 2010. Suicide rates among teenage girls increased by 57.8% and 26.8% among teenage boys since 2010. Emergency room visits for self-harm have increased 188% among teenage girls since 2010, and that increase for boys is 8%. Also, another study he refers to in his book, in 2003, persons between the ages of 15 and 24 spent on average close to 160 minutes per day interacting with friends. In 2010, that number among that same age group dropped to an average of 40 minutes per day. So a number of psychologists have, looked at the same data that Haidt looked at and have tried to explain the data. What's driving it? What's causing it? One influential psychologist, her name is Carla Vermeulen. In 2021, she wrote a book called Generation Disaster, Coming of Age Post 9/11. And she argued that this particular generation, Gen Z, a lot of stressful, traumatic things took place, traumatic events, during their time when they were coming of age. And she refers to the threat of climate change, the number of school shootings, the 2008 economic recession, and September 11th. And she thinks that this cluster of tragic events have produced a lot of the anxiety and the depression that we see in Generation Z. a more conservative writer. She used to write for the Wall Street Journal, but now she's an independent scholar and writer. Abigail Schreier, from the conservative side, she says that while Gen Z came of age, we've seen the rise in what she calls a mental health industrial complex. And she says that young people have been given and fed concepts and terminology by mental health professionals that encourages them to see sort of their normal emotional shifts and variation as, not just normal, a part of being human, but as signs of mental illness. And her advice, as a more conservative person, is that Gen Z needs to just toughen up. They need to get a stiff upper lip. Um, Jonathan Haidt does not agree with either of these two persons. Um, he says the mental health crisis, the worrying data points to something real. It's not, you know, um, they're not ginned up by mental health professionals. They're not just a result of people who are more comfortable with mental health terminology and concepts. There is a real mental health crisis amongst Gen Z. But he is unique insofar as he stepped forward and he said the primary cause of this mental health crisis is smartphone ownership and smartphone usage among Gen Z. Um, and this is important. I was born in 1972, so I'm a Gen Xer. And I think if you're a Gen X or two or older, or maybe even a millennial, because millennials are older, of course, than Gen Zs, um, we have to do some work to try to imagine what life has been like growing up if you're a member of Gen Z. I remember well the time before the internet. The first time I was exposed to the internet was, I think, 1995. No, excuse me, 1993, 94, 95. But that was what Haidt calls the first wave of the internet. I mean, we had dial-up modems. We had big, clunky desktop computers. The internet was slow. We just were trying to figure out how to email. Websites weren't too sophisticated or luring. They were just getting up off the ground. But in 2010, we begin what Haidt calls the second wave of the internet, online culture. And it's in 2010 where he says the spike in poor mental health outcomes for Gen Z begins. Uh, what happened in 2010? The iPhone 4 is introduced in June of that year. It's the first iPhone that has the front-facing camera. The front-facing camera is what allows people to take selfies. You see people extending their arms out in public places and taking pictures of themselves and the people who are gathered closely around them. The first time an iPhone was able to take such photographs or people were able to use it that way was in 2010, and that was the iPhone 4. And shortly after, Samsung introduces a front-facing camera as well. And in that same year, Instagram is created as an app that can only be used on smartphones. So I guess what we refer to as the rise of selfie culture begins in 2010. Um, in 2011, Haidt says 77% of American teens had a phone, but just 23% had a smartphone. And now you fast forward to 2016, it says 79% of teens owned a smartphone. So that's a tremendous, increase in smartphone usage. And we have to keep in mind, you know, what's the key difference between a flip phone and a smartphone? Um, a flip phone, is similar to the old-fashioned telephone that you would plug into the wall. It was more like just a communication tool. The smartphone is now a walking computer. The processors, the downloading rates are equal to any uh, laptop or desktop computer. So you walk around with a personal computer in your pocket uh, all the time. Um, you can always be online when you have a smartphone. And that's exactly what's happened, according to Height, with Gen Z. Gen Z averages 6 to 8 hours per day online on the smartphone, which I had to read that a couple times when I came across that stat in Haidt's book. 6 to 8 hours per day. That's a full-time job. Gen Z is equivalent of a full-time job that Gen Z is spending on social media apps, on smartphones, online. Um, Now, why is that significant? You know, because some people might, roll their eyes at me. I say the young people today, they're spending 6 to 8 hours a day online, and in some years that sounds like previous generations maybe that complained about, oh, the young kids are listening to rock and roll, or the young kids, are into punk rock, and it's sort of a sign maybe that, we're dealing with someone who's out of touch, who doesn't understand what's going on with young people, and what's the big deal? Lighten up, old man. This is just the way youth culture is today. Just face it and accept it. um, and Haidt has been criticized in this way by members of Gen Z who see him as promoting a kind of cell phone hysteria, or um, an alarmist sensibilities, and they point to the fact that, Haidt was born in, I think, 1963, which makes him a young boomer, I believe. But Haidt says, no, this isn't just generational hysteria and older generations, not understanding what's going on in youth culture. He observes, or he points out, modern Homo sapiens, the species, has been around for 160,000 years. And if you count archaic Homo sapiens, that's 300,000 years that we've been around. So for all those years, um, human beings have participated in in-person communities, in-person interactions. That's how we grow up. That's how we're socialized. Um, and he says, when you now have a generation that's spending 6 to 8 hours per day in isolation online, this is what the subtitle of the book, you are rewiring the brains of young people. The analogy he um, works with in the book, it's like he said, we sent a generation off to Mars. Uh, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't do our adequate research of how that would affect human development, if human development were to take place on Mars. But we allowed, to use his analogy or metaphor, we permitted Gen Z uh, to go to the equivalent of Mars, 6 to 8 hours a day online. No human being has spent that much time on an electronic device before. Um, Kids are spending less time interacting with others, less time outside, less time engaging in athletics. Um, and why is this significant? Well, it's developmental psychologists, neurologists will tell us that adolescence is a particular sensitive time for brain development. Uh, the brain during this time is working hard to make itself more efficient. And how does the brain make itself more efficient? Well, it engages in pruning, and the technical term is myelination. So, based on the activities that an adolescent is engaging in, based on the kinds of inputs that are coming into the brain of an adolescent, the brain figures out how it should modify itself given the kind of activities the owner of that brain is engaging in. So, if there are neural networks that are not being used, the brain prunes them. It kind of shuts them down so that it can focus on helping the owner of that brain engage in the activities that it is engaging. And so that part is called myelination. Uh, Fatty cells kind of start to accumulate along the neural networks that are being used by adolescents to make brain activity quicker, more efficient, faster. So based on what an adolescent is doing, that brain will remake itself to help the adolescent do what it's doing better, more effectively, more efficiently. So Haidt says this is why adolescence is a very uh, uh, important time, and we want to know how adolescents are using their time during this because the brain is going to wire itself accordingly. So 6 to 8 hours a day online is going to, um, according to Haidt, um, produce different kinds of human beings. No one has ever spent this much time online before, so you're going to get, a rewired brain. And he says what we're seeing now is a transition for the first time in human history from a play-based childhood, to um, an online childhood. And when childhood moves from a um, play-based development, which has been the practice in human history for the past 160,000 years, you're going to see different kinds of people emerge out of adolescence, according to him. Um, there's a whole another part of this book that has to do with power and economics and big tech in Silicon Valley. Um, I, I'm running short of time, so I'm going to kind of wrap it up. But this, for the church leaders and Christians on this call, this is where Christian ethics kicks into gear because when you're dealing with a power differential and you're dealing with a population that's vulnerable, this is where Christian ethical antennas, start to raise. So Silicon Valley, big tech is making a lot of money off our kids in the form of advertising revenue. They want our kids to be online as much as possible so that they can increase their revenue. So Haidt says, you got to keep in mind, big tech doesn't care about our kids. Big tech cares about advertising revenue. And he said he has a discussion in the book about how a lot of the big tech leaders studied at Stanford, and they took behavioral psychology courses where they learned how to manipulate human behavior through technology. And he says this is exactly that what they learned at Stanford is showing up in their products. Uh, they want, the cell phones are designed to pull us away from whatever we are doing and to respond to them when they get push notifications. He said the average young person is now getting at least one notification per minute on from their smartphone, which is pulling them away from interactions with family members and friends. It's pulling them away from their schoolwork. And Haidt says, everyone is blaming the decline in test scores on COVID. He says declines in test scores were happening way back in 2012, and he attributes it to increased cell phone usage. People are not able to focus because they're always picking up their phones when it buzzes and notifies them. And he says that the technique that's being applied here is the same with slot machines, right? You get a signal which is encouraging a human behavior. You want to know what's behind the notification. There's some suspense, there's some mystery, and in that moment before the notification, is revealed, or what the notification is about is revealed, the human brain gets a little dopamine hit, and you get a thrill, you get a charge out of what could be behind the notification. So
No, it's
we're,
Christine.
we're walking around with slot machines in our pockets, and our children are suffering. And Haidt says, this book is a wake-up call to Gen Z and to the people who.
You are on mute
Oh, something happened where you went on mute.
Oh, sorry, have I been muted for a while?
when you were saying Gen Z, the people of Gen Z.
Oh, okay. Um, well, I've spoken enough, so I'll just stop there. Thank you for your.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And we'll come back at the end for questions. It's this, as he mentioned, there's so much in this book, and obviously we can't get to it in a very short time, but I really wanted him to um, point out some things to begin the conversation so that hopefully you might be intrigued to learn more, because he provides a very compelling analysis of what is going on with our young people. And he also talks about some steps, which maybe we'll come to at the end. He has lots of different things, but he definitely has like 4 foundational reforms. So we'll come back to that. But next, I want to introduce you to Professor Banks. She is a professor of social work at UNC Charlotte and a licensed clinical social worker. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about self-care and some practical tips for helping ourselves, but also some things that we can do to help young people as they are coping and to support their mental health and well-being. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I almost forgot I was presenting because I was so enthralled with the information that was being shared. I too think I'm going to purchase the book. I think it's great information that I can look at myself personally as well as the youth. So thank you so much for that introduction. I am going to share my screen, and hopefully I'm able to do that without there being any issues. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. We are already winning. So this afternoon, I'm going to be speaking about ways to empower youth mental health with some practical strategies, skills, and specifically the connection with the faith community. So before we get started, I thought you should know who you're talking to, who's at the table, right? So again, my name is Sheronnda Banks. I graduated from Old Dominion University in '01 and Norfolk State University in '03 with my master's degree. I am currently a doctoral candidate from Simmons University in their Doctor of Social Work program. And literally, I do my defense next week, and I graduate in May, so I'm very excited. I am a licensed clinical social worker in North Carolina, Virginia, and in South Carolina, and I have actively been working in the field for the last 22 years. I'm a super old lady, I think, and I've been doing this for a very long time. Absolutely love what I do. Currently, I am a professor in a whole bunch of other roles at UNC Charlotte, but I'm also the owner and clinical director of Intentional Steps Counseling Services, which is housed out of Huntersville. Also, I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, and I am a mom. I have 2 lovely, I guess, young people now. I have a daughter and a son, and I am a huge advocate for self-care and resiliency. So I thought it would be important for you to know who is talking with you. So as we get into the presentation, what's important to know and to acknowledge is that the growing mental health needs of youth today, especially when you look at it post-pandemic, as well as linkages to social pressure, systemic inequities, and family stressors are growing. As you know, Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way that he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, what's important is to be able to equip youth, not just to manage crises, but to build lifelong tools in order to have resilience and regulation. So, today I want to offer some practical strategies and also invite us to think about how faith communities, our churches, youth ministries, and leaders can actively shape and reinforce this within our youth, this skill set. So let's talk about the practical strategies and interventions for youth and mental health. So what's really applicable are these strategies. And looking at it not just from a theoretical perspective, but actually looking at it from action-oriented work, how to be able to gauge an action-oriented. So one thing that has been very prevalent is understanding that behaviors just don't come from anywhere. Typically, they are linked to trauma. There is some sort of traumatic experience that youth have experienced. So when our approaches and connection with them, they need to be trauma informed. So some trauma informed ways are creating safe spaces. What that means is emphasizing environments. So those environments can be schools, churches, after school programs, things of that nature, where youth feel seen and they feel safe and they feel heard. That is how you will create safe spaces. Now, I specifically align to a space of creating brave spaces. A lot of times, the trauma that people endure, that youth endure, are so great that they don't ever truly feel safe. So, when you align to the space of creating a brave space, that means you are creating an environment where youth can feel brave enough to tell their truth, where they can feel brave enough to interact, where they can feel brave enough to engage in different formalities that are provided. You also want to look at a trauma informed way of being consistent, having these consistent relationships. So you thrive when they have predictable, supportive adults, right? That predictable, that supportive are the key words. So that's a lot of times when you're looking at mentors, youth pastors, teachers. When you show up consistently, that shapes for a youth that you will be able to be trusted and that they can be safe within that environment. So when we look at psychoeducation, this is when we're going to normalize conversation about mental health and language youth understand. We got to break the stigma. Mental health, when you think about it, has a bad rep, right? It's always looked at in most cases in a negative connotation. We want to break that stigma for youth and for others. And so by doing that, we want to normalize the conversation. If come in and says that they're dealing with depression, let's normalize it. There are many people in by themselves. So examples of what this can look like are having workshops or small group discussion that teaches the conversation and the thoughts about anxiety, about depression, about stress, and giving some real practicality about what this actually is and what this actually looks like. Then we have family engagement. This would include parents and caregivers in the process. So as we know, youth are not in an island by themselves. They're not alone. They are connected with entities, whether it's parents, caregivers, those that step in those roles like grandparents, aunts, and uncles. We want to include them within this process of discussion so that it's more of a team or process. So we can offer family education nights on youth mental health and coping strategies by informing them so that they can be more educated on what this process looks like when it pertains to mental health. You want to encourage open dialogue at home and you want to back it by the church community support. So as we're talking to these caregivers and we're helping to educate them, we want to also back that up with the church and the community so that they're hearing that language, not just at home, but in other entities. What's important is to know what's in the community. There are professional supports that are available. And the more that we can be knowledgeable about what's out there, that's when we can make connections, we can make referrals. You want to encourage partnerships between the faith community, schools, and mental health professionals, right? You want to know that there are resources there that can provide supports to the youth and that you can work together as a team in order to support that service. That can be done also by creating resource lists with local therapists, crises hotlines, and school-based services, having that within the faith community so that if someone came to church, if they came to a faith-based organization, they can still receive information about what's in that community, what type of therapists are there, what's available within their local schools. So, transitioning into specific coping skills and resiliency building techniques, there are tons of tools out there. But what's important is that we are building toolboxes for yourself as well as for you so that they have something to pull from and so that you have something to pull from if you are talking to a youth. You want to be able to have that resource. So these tools work best when youth know how to use them. So we're going to talk about when they can, what they can carry within those toolboxes. So coping skills. So what are coping skills? Sometimes there are these hot words and these like terminologies that go around. So coping skills are practical techniques that help youth manage stress, navigate challenges, and process difficult emotions in a healthy way. Typically, you have both positive and negative coping skills. The reality is that they both make you feel good. They both give the same reaction. We're leaning into the healthy and the positive coping skills. And these skills will empower youth to handle immediate emotional distress. So I want to give some examples of what coping skills and coping strategies can look like. So you could do deep breathing and grounding. So, deep breathing, of course, is teaching easy, accessible exercises like box breathing. So, the difference between breathing, regular breathing that we need to do to live and getting in the oxygen, and deep breathing is that you are creating a system where you are slowing the body down and it allows the brain to kind of relax. What box breathing is literally creating a box in the sky and you take a deep breath in as you go up the box. You take a release the breath that go across. You take another deep breath going down, and then you release the breath going across. This is a tool that you can practice with youth, and you can give this tool to them and have them practice on their own to help regulate themselves and calm down. With grounding, that's the ability to allow yourself to be present. So a technique that I typically utilize is called the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And it's a great way to use our senses in order to ground ourselves. So the way that you would utilize that would be something similar to say, take a moment and look at, tell me 5 things that you can see right now. Then you pause. Take a moment and tell me 4 things that you can hear. Take a moment and tell me 3 things that you can smell right now. Take a moment and tell me 2 things that you can touch. Take a moment and tell me that you can taste. What we did in that moment was we took our senses and we allowed ourselves to be very present within the room. I utilize that technique a lot. Even for myself, when I'm in trainings and it's hard for me to focus, I might need to ground myself in that moment so I can allow myself to be present and hear what's happening. You also have journaling as a creative outlet. What this is, it doesn't have to be traditional journaling. It doesn't have to be writing down your emotions and feelings. It can be used as an art exercise, as a music exercise, as a way to self. But it's allowing you to take the moment to get what's in your brain and be able to release it down on paper or release it in a creative tool. And that is something else that is considered to be a coping skill. Then we have resiliency building. So resiliency building techniques strengthens a youth's ability to bounce back from adversity, to bounce back, and it long-term being and perseverance. Now, post-pandemic, and this is a Sheronndaism, but post-pandemic, our youth really, really struggle with their resiliency skills. They have a hard time managing big emotions. And a lot of that has to do with what was going on post-pandemic. So some different topics and things that can help increase your resiliency is to be able to navigate from a growth mindset. So the growth mindset is to be able to look at situations not from a deficit driven position, but looking at how can I grow? How can I advance this space? So that will require you to teach youth to view setbacks as opportunities and not as a punitive space, right? So when a setback comes back, how can I grow from here and find myself not here anymore? Or if it's something that happens that's super amazing, how can I grow from here and continue to experience what I felt in that moment? So it's teaching youth how to view it in that way. Being able to identify strengths. So helping youth to name their unique strengths whenever they're not feeling the most positive. We as humans tend to align to a space of negativity. So when something happens, it could be seven great things that happen in a moment and one negative thing, and we will zone in on that space. So with our youth, we want to be able to teach how can we align to the more strength-based way of thinking, the more positive, the unique strengths that they carry. Because there's a lot of times that our youth are not hearing it. They're hearing about the behaviors that they are displaying. And in those behaviors, they could be more negative. So we want them to be able to identify what those positive strengths look like. Then we have emotional regulation strategies. So with these strategies, it will help youth recognize, understand, and manage their emotions effectively, reducing impulsive reactions and promoting emotional stability. So when we're in kindergarten, that's when we are first introduced to what emotions are, right? That's when we learn those basic emotions, happy, sad, those identification. What should happen is when we get to be about in fifth grade and we have more cognitive executive thinking skills, we should be reintroduced to emotions where we can define what that looks like for us. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. So if you were to ask me right now, what does happy look like for me? Happy is being more content versus me smiling and having this big joy about myself. But if I identify happiness as having joy, although I'm happy all the time because I'm content mostly. So if we can help the youth understand what their emotional regulation looks like, it will allow them to get there quicker. It'll allow them to be more regulated more often. So what are some skills that this can look like? So using tools like feeling charts or emotional wheels that help youth name how they're feeling. And all these tools I'm talking about, you can Google them. Google can be our best friend. You can Google emotional wheel. You can Google a feelings chart, and it will give you ton to be able to look at. But what the tool will do is it will allow the youth to be able to identify their emotions and not just basic emotions. Ability to identify more complex emotions, which is most likely what they're experiencing. It also will allow be in a space of mindfulness and being able to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is also the hot topic that we may hear a lot. And what the mindfulness does, it allows us to be present and allows us to be able to utilize our mind in order to be able to encourage the regulation. So some mindfulness techniques could look like meditation. It could look like being able to have mindfulness walks, mindfulness eating. What those two look like is instead of just walking, and sometimes you get in a space where you're like, I don't even know how I ended up here. I do my normal routine and I just landed here because that's what I'm used to doing. In a mindfulness walk, I'm going to look at the trees. I'm going to look and see how it feels to walk on the cement. I'm going to allow myself to be present, experience all the emotions. The same with mindfulness eating. As I'm eating my food, I'm going to be able to chew and I'm going to taste the different seasonings and the different spices that are in there. And how does that feel on my tongue? How does it feel going down my throat? All of those things allows you to be really present. So those can be integrated in our prayer time. And in those moments, that is that emotional regulation. So, one of the big spaces is, where does the faith community fall into this process? So one of the ways is being able to teach coping. So when you look at it from this lens, you could talk through prayer, meditation, scripture memorization, that these aren't just the ability or aligned to a religious act. These are regulation tools, right? This is a way to be able to regulate yourself because you are aligning with a value system. You're aligning with a scripture that is important to you. So you want to teach that seeking help aligns with faith, and faith and therapy, they're not mutually exclusive. They connect together, right? A lot of times you can receive Christian-based counseling. I provide Christian-based counseling within my therapeutic practice. And that is me utilizing scripture, utilizing Christian modalities and thought processes as I am teaching regulation, as I am teaching ways to identify anxiety and being able to acknowledge those spaces. Being able to look at faith-based mentorship. So we want to train youth leaders to recognize signs of distress. There are a lot of trainings that are out there that teach those abilities. So I wanted to bring up two in particular. You have QPR, which is called Question, Persuade, and Refer. It is a suicide awareness model for non-clinical individuals. So what it does is it provides a training where you understand what's going on when it comes to thought processes, what tools do you need in order to be a question, and how can you refer out to another entity to provide services. This training is a free training. It's offered in a lot of different spaces. You also have mental health first aid training. This is also another free training where it helps to increase your knowledge base about mental health on a basics level so that you are at least aware of what's happening and how to make a referral. And so youth can be trained within these models as well as the mentors. Being able to set up peer mentorship or buddy systems that are grounded in faith principles of love, empathy, and service are important. Being able to integrate into services and sermons and Bible study. So being able to directly address mental health topics using scriptural examples. So an example I had was David's laments, right? In Psalms, that can be linked to as an emotional honesty moment, right? So taking the different spaces within the Bible and spaces within the Christian faith and linking that with those mental health topics, which can be learned if you do things like the mental health first aid training. As that biblical figures experience struggle it allows it to be relatable for our youth. It doesn't seem like things or situations that hundreds of years ago, things that are relatable to today's time. Utilizing the faith communities as access points, right? So being able to host mental health workshops and partnerships with professionals within the faith community, offering confidential pastoral counseling, and making professional referrals when appropriate. So that's where that linkage is to being able to have access to knowing what's in the community, to be able to make those appropriate referrals, making those connections. So it's not enough to hope our youth will be okay. We have to equip them, mind, body, and spirit, with tools, support, and a village that reinforces their worth and well-being. So here's my call to action. Let's commit to being intentional. As faith leaders, educators, therapists, and mentors, we can weave together practical strategies with spiritual wisdom to strengthen the next generation. Thank you so much. Here is my contact information in case anybody wants to connect. I am really big on being able to provide services. So if there's something that I shared that you would know more about or try to find the connection, please don't hesitate. Shoot me an email, give me a call. I will be glad to provide that support and to provide that information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all that great wisdom and also for sharing your time with us as nearing your defending your dissertation means you were probably not you were probably short on time. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. So I want to take, we don't have much time and I do want to be respectful of people's time, but if there are any um, questions or things on your mind that kind of came up that you would like to ask either of our speakers, you can drop it in the chat. You can come off mute. I want to give that opportunity. Anybody? Well, I will say that so in the anxious generation, he offers 4 foundational suggestions. And they are 1, no smartphones before high school, 2, no social media before 16, 3, phone-free schools, and then 4, far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. And I lift those up because one, I think they're totally doable, right? It's not like the solution is to just get rid of all technology, as we know that's not gonna happen, right? It's learning how to live in healthy relationship with that, and how do we integrate the great ways that we can help emotion regulation and build resiliency into our work with young people. I know growing up in the church, primarily we thought of church as simply a time where we taught people some scripture, and then as a youth we also had fun trips. But I think about the ways that faith communities have got to be in working to create and support children into becoming holistically well in mind, body, and spirit. And so, yeah, don't see any questions jumping up in the chat. If you would like, yeah, now I see play for youth is now often replaced with video games, which are often interactive. Could you elaborate on how these differ from play in their impact?
Sure. Would you like me to take a
That would
stab
be
at
great.
that? Okay, wonderful. One of the big themes, which I did not mention in my initial comments at the beginning of the webinar, was Haidt talks a lot about parenting and shifts that have taken place culturally with respect to parenting. Um, he says that, to put it in, succinct terms, uh, we're overprotecting our kids in the real world and underprotecting them online. So he is a big advocate for this new type of parenting movement called free range parenting. We need to give our kids more freedom and more independence. We need to get them outside on their own uh, in unsupervised activities, allowing them, to go to parks and getting them outside as much as possible. Of course, then he talks about, this then has ramifications for how you plan and develop neighborhoods, and whether your neighborhood has a sidewalk, and whether there are crosswalks, and whether, there's adequate public safety. So neighborhoods are safe, so you allow your kids more independence. But we've gotten paranoid as parents. We keep our kids inside, and when we keep our kids inside, they spend more time online. And so uh, there's an interesting discussion. I've just got the tip of the iceberg for you there.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, like I said in the beginning, this is an ongoing conversation. And so I hope that you found at least some things to dig into a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to share my screen and drop a link in the chat. We would love to get you to fill out our post-event survey, because as we continue to have webinars and curate content, we want to make sure that that is helpful and reflective of what you want to learn more about and the ways that you can support the youth that you are tasked with shepherding. So I'm trying to see, having trouble sharing my screen, but Meredith, could you drop in the chat the link? Just a couple of, oh, no, did not work. Hold on. I do apologize. Are y'all seeing my screen? No, no. Okay, well, I don't know why for some reason it's sharing the wrong screen, but I will, we have a couple of upcoming events that you can find on our website, and then here's the link in the chat to a post-event survey. And as always, please reach out to us if you would love to connect, offer your feedback, and thank you so much to our great speakers for your time, and for all of you for participating in this important conversation as we continue to help make sure that our young people are taken care of. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.